I want to address some topics that came up in the previous video, and then I think we're just going to move on from this overall theme and discuss new things. But what I want to talk about today is the forced breeder programs, digital attention currency, a few other type A celebrities such as Marilyn Monroe and Onassis, just something that came up in my own life, and how some were reborn completely normally or just not even in the club anymore, hermetics, and other things that are kind of related to it. And there were some things that came up, like there were a few comments made that came up in the previous one where I was like, okay, this is worth mentioning again. But the more I think about it, because one thing was always what I had said in the previous video is I do feel bad for these Mickey Mouse or Minnie Mouse club members. I don't even know what that was anymore, but you know, all these teenagers such as Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Justin Timberlake, like those type of teenagers, like with the people who played in the Harry Potter movie series, the people who played in the Twilight series, like all these child actors who are so innocent and they're just kind of like, you know, forced into the club and everything. I want to retract that actually, because something occurred from the statement that I made within the past week to this right now where I'm recording this, where the more I actually dig into it, the more I do think, yes, of course, in a sense, a child is relatively innocent and no one deserves that reality, you know, really being forced into those movies and the entire industry that goes into it, you know, people who know, you know, what type of horrible rituals are done with child actors and everything. But I do think there's a little bit more to the narrative, which I want to call the forced breeding programs or the forced rebreeding programs, where these people, these children were also people, especially in their previous reincarnations, that possibly weren't the best people. Let's put it that way. You know, Marilyn Monroe is one of the most beautiful examples of that, by the way, but many others too, not just her, where they were just not the greatest people in general. And where I'm now thinking that, yes, of course, a child doesn't deserve that type of abuse that comes with that industry and this and that. But at the same time, because they're part of certain lineages or part of certain families. And when you look at these families that are pushing their children, especially in those type of industries, such as the movie industry and even the music industry, when you look at those type of families and where they come from, you know, there's always going to be some sort of common denominator, or they don't come out of nowhere. Let's put it that way. For the most part, I want to say 80 to 90%, those families don't come out of nowhere. Like they are pretty embedded in that industry already. And sometimes it's hard because they're not giving you much background information on those families and have to do a lot of digging. But I do think that, and there was another comment that was saying something along the lines of, oh, they're just picking like the average looking person and pushing them, for example, in these music videos or in these TV movies or whatever. Yes and no. I do think they are, the more average you look, the more you might have more success because they want you to relate to that personality and everything. But at the same time, you know, there's a lot of inversion going on too, like gender inversion and this and that. So some people are saying the Olsen twins are actually boys, you know, those type of things. Now, this is not a video on that. Okay. There are plenty of other YouTube channels out there that break that down. And for me, this is really not what I even want to discuss really in that video, because you can make up your own opinion on things and you can look at how you can determine those things and everything. But there is this issue where when you look at the families they come from, the families are actually pretty known in that industry in general. So they're basically just breeding and rebreeding and over again, and possibly just reincarnating like from one influential family into the next. For example, Britney Spears' family, like from what I've gotten with the previous incarnation of Britney Spears, she was around closer to the New York City area, like the Astor Place area in New York. And her family was an influential family in that area. And then something happened in between. But then by the time she was back in what is now Britney Spears, you know, those type of things. So they don't come out of nowhere. They likely were influential, possibly in a different industry, not necessarily the movie industry, in the previous incarnation or recyclement suit that they had until they came back and so and so. And that's what I mean with the forced rebreeding program. So there really does seem to be this one thing in regards to once you are a part of this entire club, which we discussed what that is and everything in the previous video, it could be hard to get out if you want to continue being part of the club. And like, let's just say about 100 or 150 years ago, where all these influential things started popping up, you know, first it was with the black and white movies, and then it was with the show business, and now it's with everything pretty much. But let's just say they somehow started that cycle, sold their soul off, and the entire family was a part of it, meaning also the kids. And then it just goes like from one industry to the next. So maybe they were part of the business industry somehow, and then they were part of the black and white movie, and then they were something like that. You know, it's going to be different for every case and scenario, but there's so much that goes into it. And so it does make me wonder. I mean, I want to feel bad for these kids on one hand, but on the other hand, the more I'm digging into who those kids really are and were, and the adults they're turning out to be, the more it becomes apparent that there are zero morals, that just the entire lack of morality in that entire business is really something that, you know, for normal people, that's, this is not our reality, right? This is their reality. And so for them to push that image onto us, it's just absolutely atrocious anyhow. But that's basically what I mean with the forced rebreeding programs, and how they're just being rebred from like one influential family into the next, into the next, into the next. And I want to talk about Onassis because this is an interesting thing that I don't think I've ever mentioned on this channel. But before I talk about Onassis, I'm going to go to Marilyn Monroe, because there's a comment on Marilyn Monroe and what the case is with her, if she was controlled, if she was that, and everything. And, you know, with Marilyn Monroe, I never fully read on her, only a little bit here and there and this and that, was never extremely interested in her life. The narrative that's being pushed with her is the entire MK Ultra, right? That this was just a poor teenage girl who somehow fell into this, which again, I don't believe. I believe there was certainly some sort of family or ancestral connection to that industry. Even if they make us believe she's like a foster kid or whatever, I don't think so at all. Some people again saying, you know, inverted man, this and that. That's not really for me to discuss in this video. But what I can say is, you know, the narrative from her being like a victim and looking mightily confused in a lot of her interviews, or mightily confused in regards to the life partners she's choosing, or just the life she's leading in general, and being mightily confused in her life to a point where, you know, it was over when she was 36. That narrative from her just being an MK Ultra bunny and not having much power in the life she determines kind of shifted for me when I started reading her energy. And that was right after this comment was made. So I started just looking at some of her videos. You know, you guys know I read people's energy, so I just look at their videos or their pictures. And what I found so interesting is I popped up this one video, and every time I wanted to basically just get closer to it, or kind of just slow-mo a little bit, this really annoying ad would pop up, like literally every few seconds. And for me, what that meant is they're blocking energy. To this date, they're still blocking her energy, or her energy imprint at least. They're making it incredibly hard to psychically read on this person, whoever this person was, meaning there's some sort of blockage happening that they don't want regular people or psychics to know. And I found that interesting because I hadn't gotten that previously, like 5+ years ago, when I was a bit more interested in her. And the little bit that I was able to read on her energy completely changed from being this innocent woman or a victim of a reality who was like used by JFK and everything. It completely changed to the opposite for me, because for me, I saw a person who knew exactly what she was doing. I'm going to call her she. I knew exactly what she's doing, very calculative in her moves, very dark energy, very, 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 very dark energy. You know, like she plays a lot of these overly stupid American blonde type of characters in her movies, because that's just what they wanted to portray with her. But this woman knows exactly what she was doing. Like even the affair with JFK, if that really did exist, she knew exactly what she was doing. Like she wasn't just a pawn by these two politicians, absolutely not. And so it completely shifted for me into this incredibly dark persona who was a bit dangerous even, but not sure that would have been the main reason she would have been exited out of this reality, let's put it that way. So I didn't read on her death per se, but she looks very dark, and actually like she has devil energy even. And so I think that was this particular, you can look it up, the top 10 performance or whatever, where there's a multitude of performances. And it's so interesting with the blonde hair and everything, because the blonder they try to make the hair in a lot of these actors, it's almost like the darker their personality is. But that could just be something that I'm reading into too. It's just, it is the complete opposite of what she's trying to portray is basically who she was, like devilish energy, demonic energy, in my opinion, from what I've just read on it over the past few days or the past week. Which brings me to, Marilyn Monroe was kind of known for the entire JFK scandal and supposedly having an affair and this and that, which brings me to Jackie, which is Jackie O or Jackie Kennedy, and her remarrying to Aristotle Onassis. And I don't think I've ever mentioned it on this channel or even the previous one, but I want to say around 10, 12, 13 years ago, I was actually friends with this one guy who ended up telling me, and this is exactly 10 years ago, because back then I became really interested in past life reincarnations and past life regressions. But I was telling him about one of my regressions that I had done, because that was still pretty fresh for me. And then he was like, yeah, he's actually a reincarnation of Onassis. So that in his previous life, he was Onassis. And at first I was like, okay, is this even for real? But the strange part was, so he would always tell me, before he told me this, the years before, he would always tell me about, he was this influential New York City businessman. And that's exactly because he wasn't originally from the US. So he came from a different country to the US, similar to how Onassis came to. But he basically, the only reason that he was so drawn to New York City and the only reason that he wanted to stay in New York City until he became successful in his business is because he was always this influential New York City businessman and this and that, whatever. And I definitely believe that, 100%. I believe he must have been some sort of businessman in his previous life, because the way he acted, the way he dressed, like this person was acting like a millionaire. I kid you not. We were all part of the same friends group. So then one day he goes to me and he's like, yeah, and I was actually the reincarnation of Onassis. And I was like, Onassis? See, no one really knows much about Onassis, right? All we know is he was married to Jackie, or rather he married Jackie because Jackie needed the funds or whatever. It was like this mutual business agreement that they had. And there wasn't much love in that situation. I don't think so. Maybe respect, but not so much love. But Onassis is a bit of this underdog, and there's not much you can find on Onassis. But the way this person who said he's his reincarnation, and it would definitely check out, in terms of when he was born and this and that, and also like the facial features that they have together. But the way this person acted, like, I can say one thing, I do believe it in a way. Like the moment he said he was Onassis, something inside of me was like, yeah, actually that would make a lot of sense. And even if he's not Onassis, he must be some sort of influential businessman, because there's no way a person would act like that in this lifetime, the way that this person's acting. He would be a person who would always dress in suits the same way, the exact same suits this person's wearing, actually. Very old school, very old fashioned, but more with a newer touch, meaning more like a bit more modern and up to date. And he would throw elaborate parties, but not even in the sense of a million people would be showing up. It would be like a close friend circle showing up to those parties, but the parties would be so much fun. There would be so much thought in those parties. Like he would rent out entire venues, and we would show up and there would be like dancers, like a belly dance, like this Middle Eastern Mediterranean theme would be going on, which is very unusual. Even like 10-15 years ago, it was like, okay, interesting, like wouldn't have expected this here. And then he would even, at one party, there was like this tarot card reader, like he was into the occult as well, this, at least in this lifetime. And so there would be a lot going on where it would be like these very elaborate things that you wouldn't have expected necessarily out of the venue. And just in general. And so me and another friend were talking about it like a few days later. I'm like, oh, and he thinks he's Onassis. And my other friend was like, yeah, I could see that somehow. So just putting that out there, maybe he's a reincarnation of Onassis, maybe he's not, but it's so funny how these things could work. So that's the only connection I would have to that entire drama, the JFK drama. that I would know possibly the reincarnation of him. Now I have my own thoughts on it, but I do think if he is or if he isn't, like he's definitely someone who had some sort of influence in a past life, because it just kind of shows with the things that people pull off and everything. But it is really interesting about this Onassis reincarnation though. And this also makes me believe that Onassis was not necessarily part of the club. Is that even though, let's just say Onassis was quite successful and everything, but he was always that underdog thing. The friend in this lifetime, he was never, he would always have, like in a way he would be lucky because he would always meet the right people at the right time. And he would always do that like in sense of business relationships and everything. Not so lucky in the love relationship. But what did kind of, I forgot what I was gonna say. Right. He would be lucky in terms of meeting the right people and being able to pull a lot of things off that were, just unbelievable if you just look at his own background, where he came from and this and that. But he wouldn't be overly lucky in terms of he wouldn't be able to become a millionaire like from one day to another. Like in some way he was still very much kept down. And I find that with a lot of people who were maybe successful in a previous life, or maybe even a celebrity or someone in the limelight, and now they're back as a normal, like coming back as normal, and they're completely repressed or completely like kept down in that way. And this is similar with the person that I knew. I just want to say that too. Also, this person spoke French, like had the French background, which Onassis actually passed away in France, for people who know. And I'm pretty sure he lived in France and in Belgium at one point in this lifetime. So I found that also very interesting, that how it just comes back and everything. But yeah, there's a lot that goes into ancestry and how it's related to the places that we're drawn to and everything. And also who we were in previous reincarnations, which there's just so much digging that you need to do. So I think another person asked how you can find out who you were in previous reincarnations. It's going to be your own journey to do. But one recommendation that I can give is try to find it out on your own. Don't necessarily do it with these past life regressions that others are doing on you, like the hypnosis type of things. Try to do it on your own, like on your own with a guided journey or something, because there's a lot of humbug that can be put in your brain, especially when you are under hypnosis. Let's put it that way. But the Onassis reincarnation, just to go back to that, he was actually very much into hermetics. And I think there is a lot that goes into that in and of itself too. But I do think he was more like in the darker side of hermetics, which can be quite problematic when you're trying to make it in an honest way, and then you're trying to use dishonest means and methods. And so I think yeah, again, there's like the moral side, like doing things the right way, that kind of gets lost on a soul level, maybe when you were a part of that entire thing, perhaps in previous reincarnations or whatever. But yeah, I found that really interesting. Just wanted to throw that in there. And mind you, if someone else here thinks they're a reincarnation of Onassis, definitely let us know too. But it's just the way, I feel the way that yeah, people come back to places that they used to be in, and just the energy they portray does show a lot. Now again, I'm going to keep my thoughts to myself of what exactly I think of that person. But the thing is, you can't really, with some of these characters, you can't really find that much in general. They were actually pretty private people, or just completely out of the limelight in that sense. Yes, people knew about them, but not overly enough. Like everyone knew about Marilyn Monroe, or everyone knows about these, but then there are still other people that are kind of like on the sidelines that were still relatively or very much so successful, and you can't find much on them. And then another thing I wanted to mention, but I think this is worth maybe doing another video on, is that they're trying to really siphon our attention spans into with all these attention spans on the digital screens, meaning whenever you're watching these movies, these series, or just in general looking at screens, which the screen addiction has gone up a lot over the past 5+ years since 2020 on. I believe we can all agree on that. But what they're really trying to do, in addition to the addictive tendencies that people have to now just be glued to their screens, and there are already like anti-screen movements and everything out there, and I think those are great, by the way. But what they're really doing is, unfortunately, the more people are becoming addicted to those screens, more so the cell phone screen or the tablet screen than necessarily like a laptop screen. But they're trying to actually convert the attention that they're getting. They, is these astral entities or controllers or whatever, they're trying to convert that attention that they're getting from you into actual currency. So similar to, I guess, an energetic currency or like an ethereal currency. And that's exactly the time Bitcoin and all of these other ethereal currencies have been popping up and become like made successful too, right? So that is very interesting as well. I know there are channels out there that talk about that all day long, but what I saw when I was tapping into that briefly, and I was just trying to read on something entirely different, but all of a sudden I kept seeing these dollar signs similar to, have you ever been to a slot machine? And when you just put something in it and you push that lever or whatever, you know, it's like an apple or something pops up. So similar to that, the slot machine in the astral kept showing these dollar signs, which to me was just, you know, it's a digital currency. Like they're converting your attention span to currency. And every time you give that to them through these screens or whatever, like the actual black mirrors, right? That's basically what it is. They are kind of putting that into their money banks, into their energetic astral money banks. So I'm not really sure what they're doing with that, what exactly they're building up with that, but it's worth mentioning for people who need to hear this. Now you can watch these type of videos, you know, like a podcast, like you don't actually have to look at the screen while you're watching this. I do want to point this out too, because I would rather you give your attention away in different ways. Maybe you have a hobby or something, than feeding them into these screens 24/7. But it does make a lot of sense because they want every single aspect of your life online these days, right? Like it's entire what's going on social media right now, you know, people having to post a million times and a million reels and this and that and whatever, and using ChatGPT to create their content, like all of this, it makes a lot of sense because they're really trying to get your attention 24/7 and make you as screen addicted as they can, because they're converting your screen attention to these energetic astral dollar signs or whatever. And what they're doing with that, that's going to be something to determine in the future. So worth pointing out, and I'm going to leave it at that. Hope this helps someone. If you have any thoughts to share, definitely do so. See you in the next one.